In the context of a situation where large-scale manufacturing was seen to be declining, economists turned to the small and middle enterprises, SMEs, and said, perhaps this is the solution to Pakistan's problems. They couldn't find a good solution to pick up large-scale manufacturing. This became the default position rather than coming at this thing from some broader framework, etc. It was a leftover thought. Let's try this instead. Now, what is the small-scale sector? It is basically construction, wholesale and retail, hotels, transport, communications and storage. Transport, communication, storage, transport and storage obviously often occurs very closely together. Also wooden furniture, which is mainly in Gujarat. Anybody been to Gujarat? So you see a lot of furniture places. As soon as you go on GT Road in Gujarat, you'll see one furniture place after another furniture place after another furniture place. Surgical and sports goods in Sialkot. Been to Sialkot, anyone? Right? And PVC pipes and plastic products in Lahore. These are clusters of SMEs. These are clusters of SMEs. This is where they're based. The thing about SMEs is they don't basically obey labor laws. They rarely pay taxes. If they pay taxes, they never pay full taxes, right? And so these things are not applied. So they can get away with a lot more than big enterprises can get away with. But the even bigger problem is, because they don't pay taxes, because they don't obey labor laws, because you actually don't know what output they produce, there is no real data that you can use to understand how much SMEs are actually producing. All the data that the FBS puts together, the Federal Bureau of Statistics, is not calculated, but rather it is imputed or assumed. Can you imagine? Therefore, for many, many years, you'll see SMEs 5.3, next year 5.3, next year 5.3, next year 5.3. And you'll wonder, how is it that SMEs grow at 5.3 every year? The answer is, they don't. That's just economists being incredibly sloppy. Because they don't have the data, they just put in an estimated number. And this is not even an estimate, it's a guesstimate, right? So some economists are saying, hey, they're actually growing much faster than the number indicated in the FBS. And other economists are saying, hey, you don't have a clue if they're growing faster or slower because you don't have any data to back it up. And that's the reality. So Barkey, etc., did an experiment, did a very major study on SMEs based here in LUMS. Other LUMS people were also involved in it. And they, having done the study, their findings were that 90% of economic establishments in Pakistan are small and middle scale industries. Or not, it's not even right to call them industries, enterprises is the right word, right? 90% of all the manufacturing establishments, not output, not even necessarily employment, but number of establishments are small and middle scale enterprises. They contribute maybe to about 30% of GDP and 25% of export earnings, but employ 78% of the non-agricultural workforce. So the average working class person in Lahore, Karachi, Faisalabad, Islamabad, wherever, is basically employed at an SME. 80% of Pakistan's non-agricultural workforce is employed in small and medium-scale enterprises. Now, when people ask why does Pakistan not have a big, powerful trade union movement, if 80% of people are employed in small and middle-scale enterprises, it's unlikely to have a big trade union movement, which is really the bedrock of left-wing politics as well. Yes?
Sir, is this because of very cheap labor or inefficient resource allocation?
I think those two factors absolutely play a role because labor is incredibly cheap in Pakistan, although we don't have a lot of cheap skilled labor. So we have a lot of cheap unskilled labor, frankly. Part of the reason, why do people go to China, for example, to invest? Why do foreign investors go to China? Or why do they go to Gujarat or Bangladesh? It's not that labor in China is cheaper. It's much more expensive than Pakistan. But there is a lot more skilled labor in China, which is cheaper than that category of skilled labor in US, Germany, and other places. And if those industries, were to come to Pakistan, they would not find the skilled labor in the same quantity that they would require in order to produce, let's say, mobile phones in Pakistan. So that's one factor. The other factor is that whatever large-scale manufacturing has arisen in Pakistan has arisen in the context of a very specific state-supported program. So this is the manufacturing that's rising from the bottom up and is yet to go through the competition and the necessary capital accumulation in order to become large-scale industry. So I think these are a combination of factors that are responsible. Let's look at some employment statistics with respect to SMEs. We're looking at this in terms of the year. Here are the different sectors of the economy. Agriculture, it's 100%, right? Manufacture, you see, it climbs from 34% in 72 all the way up to 71%. That's a dramatic, very, very dramatic transformation. A lot of manufacture now is in SME rather than previously where it was in LSM. In whole-scale manufacturing, not a lot of difference. In construction, not a very big difference, although you can see there's a slight incline. Similarly, transport, a slight incline. Finance, though, there's a decline. So finance is now more dominated by large enterprises, etc., and so on. Similarly, we can look at the data with respect to numbers, looking at employment with respect to the same, etc., same sectors, and so on and so forth. And you see largely the same trends. You see, for example, that overall employment in small and medium-scale enterprises has been going up. We may take this as a sign of SME's success. We may also take this as a sign of the failure of the government to develop large-scale manufacturing. The data itself doesn't say which one is which. You have to understand that. All right, so let's look at where the employment is at. When we look at mining, we see it's all in the formal large-scale sector. Small-scale sector does not really have the capital to do mining. I think it's better to look at it in terms of percentage rather than in absolute numbers. So 100% mining here. Manufacturing, it's mainly in the informal sector now. Electricity is mainly in the formal sector. Construction is in the informal sector. What are we looking? Wholesale trade almost entirely in the informal sector. Transport, storage, communications, informal sector. Financing still in the formal sector. 50-50 break over here. So what we see is, overall the picture is that mining, electricity and finance is dominated by the formal large-scale manufacturing sector. Manufacture, construction, wholesale, transport, storage dominated by small-scale informal sector. So that's the overall picture. We also can look at rates of growth, but again here, this is Khalid Nadvi's estimate, etc. Again here we see that labor productivity is much higher in the formal sector. But you can see, for example, you can see capital stock, 15.2, small scale sector, 19.2, 28.6, etc., etc. So you can see the growth, but you can also see that the large-scale sector continues to be economically much more productive. So, how did the small-scale sector emerge? How did SMEs emerge? They first began to emerge with the Green Revolution. They didn't exist really before. The Green Revolution, and they emerged around the Green Revolution. The technologies that were required of the Green Revolution, basically, were taken up by smaller enterprises. Bhutto also in the 1970s greatly encouraged the SMEs because, as you know, he felt that the large-scale industry was too dominated by 22 families. He wanted this more competitive form of capitalism to come up. So you can see that by 122%, credit was increased by 122%. Excuse the typo there, that's not meant to be a dollar, that's meant to be a percent. And Ali Chima also similarly argues that the Cottage Industries Act of 1972 plays a key role in promoting large-scale industry. And last but not least, the remittance economy, when it begins to take off from the mid-70s onwards and into the 1980s, creates this consumer demand in Pakistan for better furniture, for better houses. The whole housing boom of the 1980s is mainly driven by people who worked abroad, then sent money back to their parents and said, Mapio, here, build a nice house for yourself. So huge construction boom in the 1980s. So that's the emergence of the SME. So it begins with agriculture, the Green Revolution, and then diversifies from there. And we can see where people are employed in terms of formal as well as informal sector. And you can see very clearly that the vast majority of employment is basically in the textile sector. In the formal, that's 41 out of 100%, 30 out of 100%, 41 out of 100%, followed by food and tobacco, which is second. That's what people, those are the things that we're working on: textile, food, and tobacco. And lastly, wood and furniture, completely dominated by the informal sector, smaller karkhanas, basically. Again, we can look at some more data over here, looking at it sectorially, how it's divided. So in food and tobacco, 45% in the formal sector, the rest over here. So to break it down very quickly, we see chemicals, fabricated metals, textiles, etc., and paper publishing is essentially dominated by the formal sector. Wood, furniture, etc., completely dominated by the informal sector. See the same picture emerge from various different perspectives in terms of the data. So we put this in this nice little table over here to make it easy for you. Basic metals, chemical, rubber, plastics, formal sector. Wood products, furniture, jewelry, etc. are in the informal sector. Food, tobacco are mixed, textile, clothing, sometimes leather, metals, machinery, equipment in the mixed sort of, sometimes in the large and sometimes in the small scale sector. What is the issue with the SMEs? Why can't we go this particular route? Lots of people advocated it in the past. What are the problems? The number one and most significant problem, perhaps, is the problem of credit. If you look at Berkey et al.'s study, which is a very, very important study in my view, 57% of new investments by small and medium enterprises and 67% of their working capital comes from their own retained earnings, from their own savings. Basically, they sell stuff, they save, they invest. That means that they're unable to get credit from banks. Now, to build big, you have to take money from a bank. You have to take a loan. That's how capitalism works, right? You take a loan, you build, over time, you pay it back. If you are going to build out of your own earnings, the rate of your growth is going to be extremely slow, because the amount of capital that you can reinvest at any particular point in time is very, very small. To get a big amount of capital, what do you have to do? You put up some collateral, you get a big loan, then you build big. Because banks, of course, have the money of all the depositors. So in a certain sense, all of society, all of you guys have a bank account, right? All of you put your money in the bank. And you understand how banks operate, or should I explain that to you a little bit? Very quickly. If you put 100 rupees in the bank, that does not mean that the bank can make a loan of 100 rupees. It means that the bank can make a loan many times that size. Because you have put 100 rupees in the bank, but you are rarely utilizing more than 10% of the money you have deposited in the bank overall. Which means that that's called the reserve ratio, the reserve requirement, which is the money you put with this state bank. The reserve ratio is the amount of money that you need to have in hard currency, and the rest of the money you can give out in loans. So banks can in fact make loans far in excess of the deposits that they have, because you are not going to use that money. Correct? So they make that loan. So if they have 100 rupees, they take that as the reserve basis. That's the 10%. And they can make loans on that which are in excess of that. Samajh? So they can make a loans of worth 1,000 rupees easily on just a 100 rupee deposit. But how could that work possibly? Well, it works because you're never going to go to the bank and withdraw all your money. And it works because in time, the people that I've made the loans out to will pay us back. And when they pay us back, we'll give you more money in terms of savings. And they'll also have more money. The economy will also grow faster, etc., etc. And you'll be able to put up bigger industries and so on, right? So everybody makes money. The guy who takes the loan makes money. The bank makes the most amount of money because they're the ones that made the loan. And you also make some money from the money that I give you for your deposits, for your savings accounts. But that money can't go into SMEs. Why can't it go there? Well, most of the SME folks are either illiterate or educated only at the metric level. They can't do the paperwork. They don't really know how to make the case for a particular loan. And more importantly, even if they knew how to do that, banks consider giving loans to somebody who's metric pass, etc., can't even keep books, etc., but maybe a phenomenal karigar. They consider that to be a very, very risky investment. Most of the time, their papers are not in order. So, for example, even if they have collateral to offer, the property papers might not be in order, some other papers might not be in order, taxes are not there, etc. Paperwork is not in order, so bank is quite worried. This guy might decide one day, he might take the loan, he might invest. If it doesn't work out, he'll just get away and run and go off to the Middle East or something, and we'll never be able to recover our loan. So they're not ready to make the loans. 86% of SMEs surveyed had not acquired any bank loan. In the total private sector credit disbursement, the share that was given to SMEs is a shockingly low 1.7%. Very, very low. So 98.3% of the loans made by banks are to big industrialists, never to small and middle enterprises. Moreover, there's a problem of free riding. The sector is exempt from taxes, labor laws, etc. There's so many of them, and they're so small, it's really impossible to tax them and check them, etc. So they end up basically taking a free ride on utilities such as electricity, gas, water, sewerage, and so on. They're rarely, if ever, paying for these things, right, fully. And government has a sort of hands-off policy. So one of the reasons why SMEs really actually take off is that they're doing the work of large-scale enterprises. And if they were not connected to large-scale enterprises, if those large-scale enterprises were, let's say, closed down, all the SMEs connected to them would also close down. So it's not either or, it's in fact one is very much connected to the other. So they're intimately linked. Small and large-scale industries are intimately linked. They're locked in step. You can't sort of see them separately. Yes. Choti hai na? There's like 5 people working, 10 people working. Tax department can't. Yeah, but it's very difficult. I think you raise an excellent point. One of the reasons why why the IMF and others were recommending that we go for a GST, a sales tax, which is actually regressive rather than an income tax, is because it's impossible to know their income. Everything is there is no paper, there is no paper trail, everything is in cash. How are you going to know, so that's because you can't do an income tax on SMEs. They wanted to do a GST at the point of sale. But yeah, it's very difficult to tax it. Very difficult to tax it. This is the informal sector. I'm sitting in my home. I've employed 5 people in my house to make carpets or to make furniture or to do whatever. Who's going to even know? Let alone come and tax me. You see?